stories. Who makes them visible or invisible? So 2,800 years ago, on Turtle Island, the Salagi, Jalagi, you know them as Cherokee because the French couldn't be bothered to learn the correct pronunciation, reported the presence of the Pale One, who was a spiritual leader who brought wisdom teachings that spread throughout Turtle Island. Some of them knew him as the Good White Brother. Now this, obviously you notice the timeline, this is before Jesus. Okay? Native people were primed for the return of the Good White Brother, or at least not suspicious of people like Columbus. Okay? The teachings of Yeshua, initially violently suppressed by the Romans, were later adopted by those attempting to resurrect the Roman Empire, using a weaponized form of Christianity as the glue rather than military force. Notice, how many people did Jesus kill? None. How many armies did he have? None. Where did he get the concept of Christian soldiers? Not from him. The Romans. Who killed him? Now, part of this hidden curriculum, that is, weaponized because it advocated killing opponents, adherents of other religions, traditional cultures, and forced conversions on pain of death. So in England, starting with the Romans and continuing with the English, traditional Irish, and Scots were ethnically cleansed by Christians, genocide, to advance the goals of Christianity. Also Germans, etc. That's not part of the narrative of Western civilization, though it is in history if you know where to look for it. So the Eastern Aramaic, so when it was talking about defining Western civilization as not the Eastern Church, the Eastern Aramaic speaking church, so Yeshua, you know him by his Greek name Jesus, spoke Aramaic. The Eastern Aramaic church still exists, never engaged in crusades, never engaged in pogroms, genocide, slavery, none of that to this day. But you never hear about them, and they're not considered part of Western civilization. So part of, I think we talked about doctrine of discovery already, right?
Yes.
Yes. Right? So Columbus discovered America. So so when we look at the body of work, the emic body of work among African Americans and Africans by extension, when we start questioning in ethnic studies the teachings of Western civilization, the Western side of the church, etc., we start looking at where did this stuff come from? Where did these attitudes come from? So if we study psychology, so the psychology of Western psychology, so this is from a book Thomas and Sillam called Racism and Psychology. Black people function best when they stay in their place, i.e. inferior to whites. Social tasks and privileges normal to white men are too stressful for the black man. Blacks living in unnatural freedom in the North were more prone to insanity. Mental health was associated with contentment with a subordinate place in society, and protest was a sign of derangement. So Dr. Samuel Cartwright, a white Southern physician, coined maladies which afflicted runaway slaves. Drapetomania aegypticus, the flight from home madness, a mental illness that caused slaves to run away from slavery. In other words, you're crazy to want to escape slavery. And diaesthesia ethiopica, also known as rascality by overseers. Slaves destroyed property, avoided work, did sabotage, and raised disturbances with the overseers. So these were signs of mental illness. The treatment, of course, was whipping and etc. and torture, if not death. So in the historical view of these sciences, blacks had smaller, less complex, and less evolved brains. So, I mean, again, this is fitting in with the concept of larger brain size equaling is smarter, more evolved. And who has the larger brain? So they're saying this in the 19th century. But it's still being taught in college in the early 20th century. Okay? To this day, the American Psychological Association does not recognize that racism has an emotional impact on people of color. To this day. Okay? They actually didn't allow blacks into the AMA until the 60s. All right? So, again, this is not, I mean, this is within my lifetime. Most of you weren't born then. I remember this time, right? So, one theory of racial superiority held that Caucasians or Caucasoids were the superior race that evolved after the biblical flood, that is Mount Ararat in the Caucasus Mountains, hence Caucasoid, literally, Caucasoid means literally of the Caucasus. So this is no longer a racial categorization, but this is the three races construct that came out of Germany. Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. So Robert Downs, Down syndrome, the guy who held that Mongolism, Mongoloid features in people with that form of mental retardation were evidence of the inferiority of Asian people. Because basically what he was studying was white people in London who had what we call fetal alcohol syndrome. And part of fetal alcohol syndrome is epicanthic folds in white people. Their eyes look Asian. All right? And they're mentally, well, the term was mentally retarded. So, yes, well, Asians are also below whites in racial superiority. Again, this is the 19th century in Britain. Working on a 17th century concept generated Germany. Remember, German universities create English universities, which create American universities. Okay? Same curriculum. Okay? We call them developmentally disabled today. So even these views were widely held and formed official policy well into the 20th century. So to give you, to begin to give you a construct, what I call crash. Oh, I should actually change that. This came out before the movie, so. All right, so crash. There we go. You recognize that, yes? All right, so the people that study this stuff, myself among them, they're folks that like to just tell it like it is, and there are other folks that like to talk in code. So bell hooks refers to what is referred to by a white male writer as the matrix of domination, as white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Now, bellows being real. Brother man, the matrix of domination, they're describing the same thing. So the red pill, blue pill, well, you're not getting a choice about which you get to take, actually. So, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. So, not just white, but those who are honorary whites, conforming to the values of whiteness. Supreme and superior, one race over others. Capitalist, and what I mean by capitalist is not simply capitalism, but amoral capitalism, which is, there are Marxist friends that will say there is no such thing as moral capitalism. I disagree, but we're not practicing it in America. The idea is this: amoral capitalism, the values of chattel slavery. That is, living systems, people, animals, the land are resources, not relatives. Okay? And people have worth, relative worth. Instead of being equal, some people are more valuable than others. Really? Which of your kids is more valuable? Which of your relatives in your family is more valuable? And why? Where did that concept come from? Because if you read, for example, Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, he's saying, look, profit is good because profit is God's gift to you from your hard work so that you have something to give to others to help others less fortunate. In fact, just like Jesus, you have a God divine given blessing to help people who are less fortunate than you. That's what your wealth is for. That there's a moral obligation to bring other people up. So that nobody's hungry, nobody's starving, nobody's unhoused, nobody's unclothed. That is what you should do with your wealth. Now, he's a Methodist minister writing in the 17th century, The Wealth of Nations. I mean, if you haven't read it, check it out. It's in print. That's what he's saying capitalism should be. Yes, profit is good because it enables you to help other people, and you have a God-given duty to help other people. But what happened, what it evolved to is profit is the only good, and profit at any cost, no matter what the human cost is the ultimate good. Okay? So when I'm talking, and part of where this came from is the values of chattel slavery, which basically holds like this. You are my property, white or black. Because remember, in the beginning of the country, we haven't gotten to this time period, but indentured servants from Europe, or any European citizen paid for their passage to America, they were treated exactly like slaves. Beaten, raped, even killed. Okay? It wasn't a crime for you to kill your property. You had the right to treat your property, i.e. another human being, any way you wanted. It was your property. So in the values of amoral capitalism under chattel slavery, you as a slave owner had the right protected to rape a woman, get her pregnant, sell her child at a profit, and not feel anything about it. Okay? And this comes from basically the rights of kings. That is, if you lived on the king's land and you were hungry and starving and hunted the king's deer, the king could have you killed for feeding yourself, because it's the king's deer, not yours. First night rights, you've heard of the acronym, the F word, the F-bomb? Have you heard of the acronym of the that the F-bomb is a acronym?
Never heard that.
Okay.
I've heard some of it conversion of what it stands for.
Yes, I'm sure there are many memes about that. Here's the one that I'm working on. Fornication under command of the king. First night rights. That is fornication under command of the king. That means the king had the right to sleep with your wife on your wedding night because both of you were his property. And you couldn't say anything about it. Not making this up. This is European history under the feudal system. There were serfs. Serfs are slaves. If you worked the land, the king, if they took a liking to your wife, had the right. Remember, common law. There's common law and there's royal law. Common law is for the commoners because in England at the time, for example, it was illegal for you to read the Bible. It was a death sentence for you to learn how to read. Common law. You couldn't get married in the church. Common law. You just lived together. You shacked up. But the king had the right to sleep with your wife on your wedding night. First night rights, it's called. Boom. Your property. Think people would feel something about that? Yeah, boom, F word. That's why the connotation is sexual and also usually always an epithet. How do you think people would feel about that? Hidden history, hidden curriculum. All right? So the values then of chattel slavery become like that. All right? You're not a person, you're property. The land is an object to be owned. Women are objects to be owned and controlled. Animals, the land, resources, not relatives. Okay, that's what I mean by amoral capitalism. It is not operating from a moral or spiritual framework. It didn't start out that way, but it became like that. Starting with slavery here. Now, probably there are other people that would argue elsewhere. But. Okay? Patriarchy. Men are superior. So, white supremacist, capitalist supremacist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy presents itself as the natural and normal order of things. So, there's a golden rule and a platinum rule. Golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Platinum rule in Philippians, do unto others the way they wish to be done unto, even if, especially if, that is better than you would be treated. Which is more valuable, gold or platinum? Treat people better than you, if that's the way they wish to be treated. Which means you kind of have to know in advance. So the reason I put that in here. So crash. Classism, racism, addiction, ability, age, sexism, heterosexism. Interlocking systems of oppression. Now under racism I also put, the reason R is squared is it's also spirituality and religion. And I'll show you that, well, we have 10 minutes left, so I'll show you that later. So the way I understand, these are interlocking systems of oppression. Classism, racism, spirituality, and religion, addiction, ability, age, sexism, and heterosexism. Now, much of the literature that is written basically focuses on racism and sexism. In fact, case law also focuses on racism and sexism. Okay? Like the Lilly Ledbetter Act. Familiar with that? Okay? Obama passed it in his administration. The idea is simple. A woman working the same job as a man, the exact same length of time, should be paid the same, if she's doing the same work, should be paid the same as a man. End of discussion. That's not happening. Equal work for equal pay. Really simple concept. Because women are supporting families just as much as men are. In fact, with economic conditions being the way they are, it's women that are becoming the economic engines of families more than men. So, crash. So, isms. Individual, structural, societal, and mentality. So isms are systems of discrimination based on perceivable human differences. So Alan Johnson in his book Power, Privilege, and Difference, and he's the one who coined the term matrix of domination. We don't have to fear that which we don't understand, but isms set it up so we do fear that which we don't understand, and that which we don't understand is given less power. That is a characteristic that's different than the matrix of domination. So basically, above a certain line, you have privileges, and below a certain line, you are targeted. So that individuals can target other individuals, but structures in societies can, and structures within society can target individuals and groups. Either one of those interactions creates a mentality in the people who are privileged as well as the people who are targeted. So, in the literature, and it's mostly black folks studying racism, so this is where that's coming from, there are 6 types of isms. Now, the only thing that I've done is just categorize them as 6, because it's easier for people to understand rather than break them into 10 kinds, like the crash. Copy that, 5 minutes, gotcha. 6 types of isms. Type 1, verbal or physical assault. Okay? I get called a name, I call you a name, I beat you up or assault you. Pretty straightforward. Case law sees that as violence. All right? I can respond or use legal recompense. Type 2, nonverbal microaggressions. Now, everybody can understand, and so I can say this because it's an African American class, but it's obvious if I get called nigger, the reason the Supreme Court calls that fighting words is because of the history of the term. If somebody calls me that, I can assume they're about to attack me. And I can launch a preemptive strike because of the history of the word, right? Fighting words, right? Those are illegal in all federal workplaces, like LCC. Okay? So, it's even though there may or may not be sanctions, as there have been at LCC, like usually not. So, for example, guy just starting a job as a janitor, black guy is his supervisor, training him, and he doesn't like the training, even though it's industry standard. He's trying to improve his work performance. And he's in the first 6 months of working here when this happens, and he comments to a woman, if I had a gun, I'd shoot that nigger. Now, in any other workplace in this community, let alone the country, a gun threat with fighting words in the workplace, a federally funded workplace, I can fire you. Bye. You're in your probationary period. Bye. Gone. Instead, this person was moved from the downtown center to main campus, where for a period of time he was cleaning my office. Okay, so type 1. Now, the person works for the college to this day. So if you've read the paper and you've seen, part-time janitor suing LCC for discrimination, he got hired into a department with that kind of history, where they do nothing and are allowed to do nothing. 2 minutes, thank you. Right? Type 2, nonverbal microaggressions. So some people understand that calling people nigger in the workplace is not a good idea, so they'll do other stuff. like as referenced in the recent lawsuit in the paper. I'll call you Paco, even though I know your name is John, not Juan. I'll call you Paco. Okay? Negative racial. Well, I didn't call you Wiener. Didn't call you microaggression. Or I'm not going to take orders from you. Or I'm not going to ride in a LCC vehicle with you. Didn't call you something. Microaggressions. Type 3 is the first level of institutional ism, where it's unconscious. That is, the institution does not make any policy regarding people committing type 1 or type 2 within it, and takes no action, so it's unconscious. Type 4, conscious institutional, legal, where it's legal to discriminate and the institution does that because it's the law. The state of Oregon, apartheid South Africa, Jim Crow South, slavery, it's legal to discriminate.
In the state of Oregon, you said?
State of Oregon was created to disallow black American citizens of the United States from coming here. It's the law. That's how the state was created. We haven't gotten that in the timeline, but it's still true. Type 5, conscious institutional. It's illegal, but they still do it because it's profitable. And type 6, socio-structural violence. Okay, so each one of these requires a different strategy. And if you're going to fight them legally or illegally, basically you have to understand how they work and how they affect you. And we'll continue that on Wednesday. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yes. Huh? The first 14 pages of that book.
Nazichoziva umwari asika ndipo